Thank you. And I thank the organizers for having invited me. It's my pleasure to be here. I want to talk about citizens and experts. The relation of citizens to experts is certainly a long-standing topic in political theory, extending from Plato forward. Today, in a complex and uncertain world, it's more important than ever. Our lives are organized in countless ways by experts and discussed in languages that are often too arcane for most of us to understand, at least understand them very well. So if citizen participation remains the cornerstone of democracy, my question is, where does that leave us? Is there a way around this? Is there an alternative? In the face of the elitist, technocratic tendencies of modern experts, one of the responses has been to call for collaborative or participatory forms of action-oriented inquiry. What follows is based on a mix of theoretical literature and my own empirical observations in a number of places. Participatory inquiry focused as much on deciding what to do as on identifying the empirical problem in need of action, is in significant part the product of the work of activists and progressive professionals identified with developing world communities and new social movements of the more advanced industrial countries. Basic to these efforts has been the development of an alternative political culture and the participatory institutions that sustain it. As such, these projects have provided a social forum, even laboratory, for experimentation with new sociocultural modes of expertise. Fundamental to the experiences of these movements have been various experiments with participatory or collaborative approaches to expertise. Such experimentation, emphasizing empowerment and self-help strategies, is largely designed to counter the bureaucratic and elitist tendencies that define contemporary political and organizational decision processes. Focusing on the development of a non-hierarchical culture, the theorists of these movements have attempted to address a critical question. Is it possible to democratize, or let's say, make more democratic, the largely hierarchical, often authoritarian expert-client relationship? Toward this end, a key target of so-called movement intellectuals has been the superior subordinate relationship the professional maintains with his or her clients. There are several basic arguments for participatory or collaborative inquiry. First, participatory inquiry addresses the fact that experts have too often wittingly and unwittingly aligned themselves with elite interests. Emphasizing citizen empowerment, participatory inquiry offers a way of more democratically restructuring this relationship. A second argument relates more specifically to the task of problem solving, particularly as it pertains to the so-called category of wicked problems, where the problem itself, let alone the solution, is unclear and needs to be identified. Such problems are seen to lend themselves to participatory collaboration between experts and citizens. A third issue concerns policy implementation, where the task is to interpret the meaning of general policy rules for specific local contexts. Not only can participatory practices help to identify the relevant local facts of the situation, they are seen to build the legitimacy and motivation needed to effectively implement rules and procedures. In these cases, bringing in local citizens can play an essential role in problem solving. Even if participatory inquiry is not the cure for all of the problems plaguing the professions, which it surely is not, these contributions suggest at minimum that it should be taken seriously and explored as an available technique in the expert's toolbox. Although most professionals hold much of this to be unworkable, if not totally unrealistic, a closer look at numerous experiences of social movements, for example, popular epidemiology in the environmental movement, and institutionalized deliberative practices, for example, consensus conferences, reveal that ordinary citizens are capable of much more than the conventional wisdom would suggest. No case better illustrates such capabilities of ordinary citizens than that of the gay movement's struggle against the spread of AIDS in the United States. As the gay AIDS activists in the United States have shown, lay people can learn a great deal about science. At times, they can even take charge of their own empirical experimentation. In the movement's struggle to find a cure for AIDS, largely in conflict with the professional medical community, the boundaries between scientific insiders and lay outsiders often crisscrossed in what one writer described as a credibility struggle. In addition to revealing how scientific certainty is constructed and deconstructed, the experience shows that non-scientists were able to have gained enough of a voice in the scientific world to have participated to a remarkable extent in the shaping of the National Health Institute's sponsored research. Other important examples are found in efforts to site and manage nuclear power plants and hazardous waste incinerators, particularly in the U.S. and Canada. Overcoming the barriers posed by technical languages that shroud normative issues about complex technologies, lay citizens are often seen to intelligently comprehend basic elements of the relevant policy issues and arguments. Similarly, various experimental projects have demonstrated lay citizens' ability to learn enough science to judge questions of technical risk for themselves. As one project concluded, quote, "There's no reason to believe that citizens are incapable of mastering the necessary science, at least if they're willing to devote sufficient time and energy to do it." A closer look at such experiences nearly always reveals the presence of cooperative relationships between citizens and experts, or an expert. Almost invariably, a professional expert emerges to assist the community in answering its own questions. Such experts help communities grasp the significance of evolving development, think through strategies, and even directly confront a community's opponents. Such participatory consultation serves to both broaden the citizens' access to the information produced by scientists and to systematize their own local knowledge. We can identify a new professional role, that of the expert as a facilitator of citizen learning. And what we learn from these experiences, what can we learn from these experiences, given that the basic concept of participatory inquiry flies in the face of the professional commitment to technical rationality and the hierarchical practices that administer it? The question is not an easy one. With the exception of a small number of progressive, radical professionals devoted to innovating alternative practices, the citizen or client's role is typically treated as a threat to professional status and authority. In view of the challenge, I want to suggest that the consideration of a formal professional role for participatory inquiry should be governed by several considerations. The first involves participation more generally. Although participation is a political virtue in and of itself, as a practice, it's very challenging and often a frustrating endeavor. Unfortunately, much of the discussion of participation is shaped by ideology rather than reasoned analysis. The political left all too often simply calls for more of it, and the right rejects it as an exercise in folly. But a closer look shows that participation shows participation to be much more complicated. Citizens can participate, but it's not something that tends to just happen. Participation has to be carefully organized, facilitated, one could even say nurtured. Before advocating or entering into a participatory project, we need to recognize that citizen schemes rarely follow smooth pathways. Local people may themselves be highly skeptical about the worth of investing their time and energy in participation. In some situations, participation will lack local relevance. It may carry significance for outsiders, more for outsiders than it does for the relevant communities. Moreover, not everyone within the community will be able or motivated to participate. Even when there is sufficient interest in participation, there will be time barriers, and so on. The point is this: without concern for the viability and quality of participation, it's often better, or is in fact better, to forego the effort. Citizen inquiry, in short, is a complicated and uncertain business that needs to be carefully thought out in advance. Moving beyond the rhetoric associated with the endeavor, we need to problematize the question of participation. We have to conduct careful research into what citizens can in fact do, what kinds of institutional reforms will help them do it, and in which kinds of policy domains such activities are appropriate. My second and closely related question is, to what degree can the average citizen's capacities to participate be facilitated or extended? There's nothing profoundly new about the idea. Facilitating citizen participation and problem solving, one can find it in the writings of John Dewey, and later in Harold Laswell following Dewey's lead. In The Public and Its Problems, Dewey sought to rejuvenate the possibilities of democracy in a mass industrial society by calling on experts to facilitate public learning. As I've argued elsewhere, the practice of participatory inquiry is in many ways the practical extension of Dewey's theoretical argument. One can question whether or not the urban industrial society in which we live and its mass plebiscitary politics, even post-democracy, to use Crouch's term, is ready for participatory democracy, despite the fact that deliberative democratic theory is the liveliest topic in political theory. The facilitation of citizen deliberation is a practice that's often hard to find in contemporary society. Having said that, a place to begin is with the extensive literature on citizen problem solving and facilitation in the field of participatory research and adult education, particularly the literature on transformative learning. This literature spells out methods for enlarging citizens' abilities to pose, in their own languages, the problems and questions that interest and concern them, and to connect them to the kinds of information and resources needed to help them. As a technique of empowerment and self-help, facilitation is designed to challenge learners with alternative ways of interpreting their experiences and presenting them with ideas and behaviors that assist them in critically examining social and political issues in terms of their own values, ways of acting, and the assumptions by which they live. The medium of this interaction is a complex dialogue, sometimes likened to a transactional drama, in which the philosophies, personalities, and priorities of the participants interact continuously to influence the nature, direction, and form of the subsequent learning. The task is to learn the conditions for clients' learning and to design and enable environments within which clients develop their own interests and courses of action. Toward this end, professionals become experts in how citizens or clients learn, clarify, and decide. The basic focus of such inquiring systems is a process that Paulo Freire has called problematization, a term that Foucault also used in a somewhat different way. Rather than reducing human experience to components amenable to technocratic treatment, that is, to mere difficulties to be analyzed and solved, problematizing helps people codify into symbols an integrated picture or story of reality that, in the course of its development, can generate a critical consciousness capable of empowering them to alter their relations to both the physical and social worlds. In the mainstream literature on professional expertise, problematization is taken up by the famous Donald Shern in his book, The Reflective Practitioner, in which he speaks of problem posing as his terms, a conversation with the situation. Which brings me to my third point, the need for an epistemics of professional practice. If we are to create the institutional and intellectual conditions that help people pose questions in their own language, in their own everyday languages, and to decide the issues important to themselves, we need to know much more about the epistemic dynamics that govern these interactions. There is some emerging work in this in the field of communications, but we're still in the early stages. We need to learn more about the movements and uses of information, including how social assumptions are embedded in research designs, the specific relationships of different types of information to decision-making, the ways arguments move across different disciplines and discourses, the translation of knowledges from one professional community to the other, and the interrelationships between discourses and institutions. In particular, we have to focus on the ways in which professional groups and local communities see and inquire differently, how such differences lead to disputes, how people communicate across their differences, and how, at least at times, they get transformed into new understandings and commitments. Of special importance is the interaction between expert inquiry and the processes of political and policy argumentation, in particular the ways it is reflected in the discourses and debates that constitute and shape policy networks or policy communities. This involves as well understanding how multiple discourses get coordinated in and across institutions. The professions have almost totally neglected these epistemic translations, which has occurred at considerable cost. Many of the conflicts between citizen experts can be attributed in one way or the other to this neglect. Nowhere is this problem more clearly identified than in the literature on environmental risk, which features experts complaining that irrational citizens are incapable of understanding technical analysis, when, in fact, it turns out that through epistemic investigation that it is only a matter of citizens thinking differently about the same questions. Whereas the risk assessors emphasize the technical outcomes of their analyses, lay citizens are more concerned about the socio and cultural processes which shape and determine the analysis. Who's saying this? Who do they work for? Have they been able to trust these people in the past? And so on. That is, a form of analysis that is perfectly rational when one is willing to concede the high degree of uncertainty associated with the risk assessment, often publicly reflected in the politics of expertise and counter-expertise. Finally, these issues raise daunting questions for the professional curriculum. Let me just mention two, maybe one. How am I with time?
Not 20 minutes.
Huh?
Yeah, not.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. At issue here is the need to eliminate the dominant professional commitment to and trust in the the superiority of technical rationalities and the hierarchical superior subordinate practices that accompany them. Once we recognize that participatory inquiry is as much a creative undertaking, resembling an art form as much as a science, we venture into complicated pedagogical territories. Unlike the scientific methodology, the craft of participatory inquiry can have no set formulas, which thus makes it difficult to teach. How, for example, do we educate the students of a profession to appreciate the emancipatory potentials of a situation or, say, the boundaries of human virtue? This, no doubt, requires greater exposure to the humanities, history, novels, and poetries than it does regression analysis. I think I'll skip over the next part. And
It's 20 minutes just now, so...
I'll do it then. This places unique social psychological demands on the professional. Given that one of the major reasons why people become experts is to enjoy greater socioeconomic status and authority, we confront here the problem of career ambitions, often coupled with inflated egos and continual temptations offered by more attractive, upward mobile career alternatives. This is to say that if such cooperative research is to work, it requires experts with a high level of social commitment and personal self-development. This means confronting the social, emotional, and intellectual distance that separates the professional from the client's experiential life world. The training to reach such interpersonal skills, or what Torbert defines as transformational leadership, is necessarily rigorous and formidable. Such training has to bring professionals into closer contact with the client's natural setting, their everyday experiences, culture, and interests. The practitioner has to also appreciate that a commitment to participatory dialogue, although clearly political in its import, is not to be confused with simple political proselytizing. The facilitator may passionately advance ideas about how something's missing here, but that's okay. Oh, wait a minute, it's over here. But basically, we're talking here about developing and introducing what I'd call a post-positivist curriculum. That's a larger topic. A second point is in many ways much more difficult. It involves the problem of facilitating professionals into a more egalitarian, democratic relationship with non-professionals. Well, I sort of got myself, having said I would do that, I jumped around here, and now I'm not lost exactly, but just to say that this kind of transformational thing, obvious, is not simple, and it's not normally a part of the curriculum, and it's not even entirely clear how we could introduce that, as we are not fundamentally psychologists, at least people who do planning and policy analysis, but we need much more appreciation and understanding of it. Okay, finally, these issues raise daunting questions for the professional theoretically. No, by way of conclusion.
Okay.
I thought I had 40 minutes, then we talked 20 and 30, so I got myself. Okay, but I'm okay. I'm okay. Good. Then I'll take a drink of water.
Just take your time.
Theoretically, the point is obvious. These points are obvious, but in practice, it's difficult, more than difficult than we normally recognize. By way of conclusion, let me say just a few words about the prospects of more formally introducing such participatory action inquiry. First, to repeat, I'm not suggesting that it be added as an alternative professional approach. I'm not saying that it should be the professional approach. For one thing, expertise is wider than participatory inquiry. For another, we need to gather more experience about the practice. When does it work? When does it not work? If approached without caution, participatory inquiry runs into a high chance of failing, and failure will only offer the critics of participation, of which there are many, ammunition to suggest the foolishness of the endeavor. Thus, I have suggested that it should be taken on as part of the research agenda. This is a task for those in the profession committed to democratic decision-making in a more egalitarian society. Moreover, the chances of establishing participatory inquiry in the professions will depend as much on cooperative support from social movements or forces outside the university. In this respect, the possibilities are as much a matter of politics as they are methodological innovation. The society we live in is techno-bureaucratic in form, and there are big rewards for serving this system. Much of what goes on inside the university is aimed at facilitating the technocratic system of expertise. Indeed, this is what is marketed to the students. What is needed is, I'm arguing, a politics of expertise inside the disciplines that reflects the concerns and issues of the progressive social movements beyond the hallowed walls of the university. In all cases, for those interested in helping to bring about a more democratic society, making such participatory inquiry work poses, I think, one of the important challenges of our time. Thank you.